Welcome to this Objects of Reference webcast. This webcast will give you an overview of what objects of reference are. It will discuss why we use them and what their purpose is, who they will benefit, when and where to use them, and an example of some objects to use. It will then go through the process of how to use objects of reference. So, objects of reference are physical objects that can be understood by the child. I know that every single one of you will be using this naturally with all the children that you work with, picking up a child's shoe when it's time to say garden now or outside now. When we are looking at objects of reference, we really would be looking at functional objects that the child could understand. So a cup for drink. We all know that there are times, places and activities that the object that represents that activity can't be the actual thing, like the whole garden or park or outside area. And this is when we'd use representative objects. So such as here, an artificial leaf that could be used to represent the outside area. It's really important with things like the outside that we make sure that that is the same for the whole year. So although you might think about using a child's coat for outside, that wouldn't work because in the summer you wouldn't need a coat. We could also use, where possible, maybe miniature items. So this is a doll's house toilet, so that could represent your toilet. Or you could use partial objects, such as part of a blanket that maybe is always on the sofa. Why do we use objects of reference? What is their purpose? Objects of reference are a transactional support. So they are an additional visual resource that helps a pupil. It helps a pupil within their social communication because when we give an instruction and it's just verbal, our words disappear. They're not there. They're not there for the pupil to recognise and process after they've been said. But if we were to say drink, and continue to hold our cup there for them, it allows the child to understand what's been said, process it, recognise it, making this very safe for them because it provides meaningful information to them about what is happening. That links in with our emotional regulation. Because the object is still there and it's safe and those words haven't disappeared, that information is still there. It makes what is happening next so much more predictable because it's the same cup every time they get their favourite juice or it's every time that they have a drink. That means that their child will be able to regulate a little bit more because they can understand what is happening now and what is happening next. Also, our transactional objects are desirable. They are real things that they can recognise and understand, making it much more desirable for the child to understand what is happening next and therefore able to enjoy and take part in what is happening next. So, which children might we use this objects of reference with? Well, we would focus our use of objects of reference with our social partner children or our language partner children. But that is not to say there might be an individual within that conversation partner stage that may benefit from these as well. They're really important for our social partner children. It is an additional concrete visual that the child who may not have the words yet, the verbal communication, but understands an object, it really helps for them to communicate. So for us to communicate with them and for them to communicate with us, as well as keeping that consistency and safety for that language partner who finds the world overwhelming and something like a concrete visual in front of them helping them understand the world. So, how should objects of reference be used? When should we use them and where should we use them? Well, we would like them to be used as consistently as possible. So the same object in the same way with the same key word, drink. Ideally, that this would be the same object between home and setting where it's possible to have duplicate items. And it's really important that individuals in the setting know exactly where the objects are, maybe in a bag for the objects, that is consistent between each person working with the child. So, picking the objects may be the easiest for most part of the objects of reference, or you might be thinking, I'm really worried about what I'm going to choose. Top tip number 1, let's just start with a few, maybe key activities that are essential to that child's day, or motivating things that that child really, really loves. So thinking about what they need for their basic needs, drink. Or they might be really motivated by cooking, so that a wooden spoon representing cooking. Or it could be that they love music. And this is where you need to think carefully about the items that you choose, because this item could represent playing music, so the musical instruments out, or it could represent putting some music on in the background. Whichever you choose and the team around the child chooses, make sure that that is consistent. So if it's chosen for musical instruments, keep this item for musical instruments and don't confuse it with the other type of music. It's much harder to pick objects that are representative, so for things that you cannot physically put in the bag, like the sofa or the whole of the garden. You might need to think creatively as a team about what you're going to choose. One way of doing it is, if you can, getting a partial bit of an object, so a snippet of their favourite blanket, so that is in the bag, so it feels the same as their blanket and they know that's what it represents. And this one here is representing home, because their favourite blanket is at home and will always be there. It could be something that was way too big to put in the bag, such as a bike or a trike. That's where the miniature objects are really, really useful. Or if it's thinking about something like the classroom, is it that there is a yellow chair in the classroom and you can use a miniature object that is similar to that with a link such as colour? Some objects of reference are much harder to decide on, because by their very nature, it's really difficult to find something that represents that thing or person or activity. If we think about maybe mum at home, how do we represent mum? It could be something like a bracelet that she always wears. This works if there's a bracelet that can be very similar and the child recognises this and links it to mum. Or it might be that actually a scarf covered in mum's favourite perfume, the scent and the object really helps that child link home time now, mummy now with that object. Occasionally, you might find that a child associates a place or an item with something quite abstract. Maybe the first time they went to the cinema, there was a rubber band, maybe, and they picked it up and had it on their wrist and pinged it for the whole time. So then suddenly something very abstract becomes linked to cinema. And finally, I touched upon this earlier. When things change, then that's really difficult to find something that is concrete. So something seasonal, like the outside area or a garden or a park, might change. So something that would be obvious in the winter to use isn't as obvious later on. So thinking outside the box by using maybe an artificial plant, or maybe a pot, a picture of the pot of something outside that doesn't change, will help the child understand even when the seasons change. So, how to use objects of reference. I think it's really important that the objects are kept in an accessible place. That links back to our safety, the reason that we use them, that they are safe and predictable. So if they are consistently used and they're kept in a consistent place, that means everybody can use them whenever that instruction is given to the child. This could be something that's really common in school, like a book bag, or a drawstring bag, which is brilliant for taking outside. Or it might be that it's a box. Now, mine's quite a small box. Yours might end up really big with all the objects. Or you might decide to use a smaller box to allow the child to use some choosing of the objects at different times during the day. How to use an object of reference. When it's time to give a child an instruction about what is happening next, get your object from the bag. And as you would naturally, get close to the child, get on their level, talk in a tone and manner that is comforting and calming to the child. It might be side by side. You know the child to know how close you can get to them. Or maybe opposite, because that increases interaction and maybe shared agenda. It's important that we remember other things like keeping our language clear and simple and using our child's name first so they know that this instruction's for them. So, Frankie, eat, showing them the plate. Once you're sure that the child has taken on board that first instruction, Frankie, eat, move with the child, continuously showing them the item and occasionally repeating the instruction, Frankie, eat. And then you can move to your desired location and repeat the instruction again, Frankie, eat. During the activity, it's important that the object stays visible to the child if possible. Now, when it's eating, that's a little bit easier because either the food will be put on that exact plate or one very similar. When it's a different activity, say music, there might be a place close to the musical activities that Frankie's object can be kept, and so it's there and that link between the activity and the object is developed. As soon as the activity comes to an end, it is important that the object's removed so that they associate finished as the object goes back in their bag or box. As the child begins to become really secure and familiar in the objects that we are using, you could then start to see if they could use it as a timetable. So as the example is in front, that the child would know it was torch dark time, sensory room time, then trains, then toilet, then a drink. This will help, the use of this will help the child understand the next activities. And if we think about our emotional regulation and our social communication and our predictability, that keeps the information really safe and predictable and therefore desirable for the child to understand what is happening throughout their day. As I mentioned earlier, it's really important that the child uses these objects of reference for themselves, and it's a brilliant way of helping them communicate and therefore feel safe in their own world and help with their emotional regulation and development of their social communication. One idea is that the child has access to these objects and maybe just a smaller amount in a small box or all of them, and the child can pick and show you what they would like to do. This develops all of those key skills like social interaction and gaining an adult's or another child's attention by using these objects. One lovely idea to help the child with their social communication is by placing the objects in transparent boxes. This means as the child hands you the box, you can develop lovely turn-taking, initiation, and even expectation as you open the box carefully and slowly, maybe having some of that shared attention together before handing them the desired object to play with. Our objects of reference are there to aid communication and are there to make a visual support on what is happening. It's important that the child knows that they can always have a break from an activity, that the activity can be switched if it's not meeting their needs at that moment in time. And maybe there's a way to show the child that something unexpected has happened so that they can be prepared for things that they have not come across before. Objects of reference are an important transactional support tool. They really help the child to develop understanding of words, to develop that knowledge of names of objects, and to make choice and communicate with others. And it really helps the child to understand what is happening. So to go back to those same words that we keep saying, it helps the child because they are safe and predictable, which will help the child feel so much more emotionally secure.